Hello, everyone. My name is Andy Bingle. I am the Director of Operations at NREL. And first of all, I want to say thank you very much for coming to the webinar of the risk of the insecurity of gas insecurity on the power system. So I'd like to introduce to you our two speakers today. We have Carlo Brancucci and Brian Sergi. Carlo Brancucci is the co-founder and CEO of encoord. He is an expert in power system modeling and renewable integration. And I'd also like to introduce Brian Sergi, who is an energy systems modeler at the Grid Planning and Analysis Center at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. His specialization is in long-term planning of electric power grid. And so we're very happy to have both Carlo and Brian here with us today. And Carlo, I will let you take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy, for the intro, and thank you everyone that is joining today's webinar. We really appreciate your attendance, and I look forward to your questions at the end of the presentation. So I also want to thank Brian Sergi from NREL for his availability to join me today in this interesting webinar on keeping the lights on and heat on the risks of gas insecurity on the power system. Or in other words, what we are going to be talking about today is what is the impact of extreme weather events on gas pipeline operations and the resulting impact on power system reliability. As many of you probably have been reading in the news over the past couple of years, there is an increase in the impact that extreme cold events have on the reliability of the US power system. This has happened in Texas in February of 2021, and this has happened again in December of 2022. And there is no better time to talk about this than now, as temperatures start to get colder here in Colorado, where I am, and as winter is coming, and we need to get ready for these new weather events that are going to be stressing in different ways both our gas and power infrastructure. So why does this matter, and why are we talking about this today? So here we can see an image of the national gas infrastructure in the US. And as you can see here, the natural gas pipelines run for millions of miles across the United States, from east to west, from north to south, to deliver natural gas to a large number of industries, of commercial buildings, and of homes. Many of us use gas at home for heating space and heating water. We also have a second critical energy infrastructure in the United States, the electric infrastructure. And as you can see in this image, overlaid over the natural gas pipelines, we have millions of miles of electric lines that form the electric power system of the United States. These two critical energy infrastructures are the core of every economic activity and of the well-being of every person that lives in the United States. These two critical energy infrastructure have never been so interconnected with each other as they are today. And that is primarily driven by the fact that in the United States, there is over 1,500 gas-fired power plants. As much as I am aware, no gas-fired power plant is able to store gas that then is used to generate electricity. Their ability to generate electricity depends on the ability of the natural gas pipeline system that they are connected to deliver gas at the right time at a minimum pressure level. Therefore, without the natural gas pipeline network, natural gas power plants wouldn't be able to generate electricity. And this is becoming an opportunity and a challenge for the power system, because today, the largest source of electricity in the United States is natural gas. 40% of electricity is generated by burning natural gas in the US last year. That percentage can be significantly larger in certain regions of the United States and during certain periods of the year or times of the day. At the same time, the power sector has become the #1 consumer of natural gas. So the natural gas pipeline network that has to deliver gas to keep people warm in their homes and keep industries producing and commercial buildings operating now has to also deal with a significantly larger gas demand for electric generation. In addition to that, these two energy infrastructures are interdependent at other coupling points beyond gas-fired power plants. There is a significant increase in electric-driven compressor stations. Traditionally, compressor stations were driven by natural gas, but over time, many of them and many new ones have been designed to be electric-driven, meaning that their ability to compress power so it can be transported from where it's supplied to where it's consumed requires electric power. So you can imagine if there was to be a disruption in the natural gas pipeline system, that will affect in some way the power system during periods where it depends on natural gas fire generators to meet demand. And vice versa, the natural gas system will be impacted by potential electric power contingencies if compressor stations that are electric driven are not able to be operated because of a brownout or a blackout in the power system. This interdependency and this critical infrastructure challenge that can affect significantly national security is exacerbated during extreme weather events. And I'm going to show you an example of a balancing area of the US power system from February of last year. This is real data taken from EIA, from the Energy Information Administration, that shows how in this balancing area in the United States, during this 5-day period, there was a significant electric demand day ahead on their forecast. So the power system operator under forecasted the demand that it expected the following day for some reason. That following day, what happened is that wind power dropped from generating over 3,000 megawatts to just over 300 megawatts. So over an 80% decline in a 20-hour period, while demand was increasing during that period. The system was able to meet demand and keep the lights on. And this was possible thanks to the response of very fast responsive gas-fired power plants that were able to increase its generation from 1,400 megawatts to 3,800 megawatts in 18 hours. That means the gas pipeline network was able to significantly increase the gas delivery at those gas-fired power plants, so they could ramp up from 1,400 to 3,800 megawatts in just 18 hours. What makes this scenario extremely interesting is the fact that this happened during a very extreme cold scenario. This again is real data from a real power system last year. While this was happening, temperatures dropped from 50 degrees Fahrenheit to -3 degrees Fahrenheit in 20 hours, or from 10 degrees Celsius to -19 degrees Celsius. Why this is interesting and why this is a great example of the challenging interdependency of electric and gas infrastructures is because you can imagine that the natural gas infrastructure, at the same time that it was responding to a large increase in gas-fired generation to meet the load under forecast and the decline in wind power, it had to meet a significant increase in gas demand for heating. Every building in this region increased significantly its natural gas consumption to keep the homes and the commercial buildings and the offices at safe and healthy temperatures for the people in those buildings. So you can just imagine the major stress that this caused in the gas pipeline network that was delivering gas to the gas-fired power plants in this balancing authority. In this specific scenario, we know that the gas network operator was able to meet both its electric system demand, gas demand, and the other gas demands. But this was possible thanks to the flexibility it can provide. And Brian will talk more later about that and what the value of that flexibility is and what could happen if that flexibility wasn't there. I want to show one last example. This is from March of this year for the same balancing authority. I'm showing these examples because I want to highlight that these, what we call extreme events, are actually not necessarily that rare. This is an event that happened again in March of this year, where wind power dropped from generating 58% of the demand to generating zero in just 12 hours. That meant that gas-fired power plants had to go from generating 25% of the demand to 76% of the demand in that 12-hour period. This did not happen during an extreme cold event, but just during a mild temperature period for this region of the United States, where temperatures fluctuated between 30 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit during this 5-day period. As we integrate more renewables and as climate change causes more extreme cold events that in some cases may be harder to forecast, the challenge of the interdependency of electric and gas networks on national energy security is becoming more of a concern for many of us that work in the energy industry. I want to ensure our electric and gas infrastructure are ready to deliver power and to deliver heat when needed. That's what drove NREL and encoord to do a study on the hidden flexibility of the natural gas network for electric power operations, a case study of a near-miss winter event. And I will now give the word to Brian Sergi from NREL, who is going to walk you through the study that we recently published. Thank you all, and I look forward to your questions later on. Thank you, Brian. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, Carlo. As Carlo mentioned, I'm Brian Sergi from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. As Carlo kind of prefaced, we kind of were interested in these winter events that they worked, like the system operated during these times. There weren't any outages on the power system, and there weren't any inabilities of the gas network to deliver gas. But we were sort of interested in probing deeper here to understand what were the conditions that made this a success story, and how might things have looked differently. You know, what led to this working, and under what circumstances might that not work out, so we could try to understand and predict and prevent these types of events in the future. Okay, so just to highlight the framework here, we basically took advantage of encoord's Saint software platform to develop a model that allows us to represent the coupling that Carlo mentioned between the electricity and the gas networks. So we have electricity generation, we have a power system network that models all the generation and needed to meet load, including some aspects of the transmission system. We basically have a production cost model that determines what generators dispatch and how you meet your reliability targets and operate the system at least cost. On the other end, we have a gas transmission system. So we model the gas pipeline network. We have, Saint uses a dynamic gas simulation model. So we're capturing all the dynamics of how gas moves through the system, including things like line pack and operation of compressor stations, which can provide limitations on how the gas is able to be delivered to different parts of the system. And what we do is essentially model the coupling between these, primarily through the offtake of gas at gas-fired power plants. So there's a number of ways these systems are linked in reality. We focus on one of the biggest ones, which is just the gas that needs to be delivered to the gas-fired generators to keep them operating. And a key constraint in all of this is that gas-fired generators typically need that gas delivered at some minimum operating pressure in order for them to successfully operate. And so if there's not sufficient gas in the system, or there are constraints on the gas network such that you don't have sufficient pressure, you may have to curtail some of those planned offtakes at that gas generator, which means you can't deliver the gas. And that's sort of the fuel starvation type events that we've seen in other winter storms. So as I mentioned, the Saint software platform basically, enables this coupling and has modules for both of the systems, and then we allow them, or we basically take advantage of that coupling to represent the interaction here. And so for this study in particular, we basically start out by taking some of this data that Carlo mentioned and using it to build models of both the electricity and the gas transmission side. A big plus here was working with our collaborators. We were able to get access to kind of more detailed pipeline information, which helped us understand a bit more of the dynamics on that side. We start out also then by benchmarking this model. So we take our model, we compare it to what actually happened in reality, try to get a sense of, under our baseline assumptions, are we relatively appropriately capturing what happened in the system so that we can then expand from that with other sensitivities to test different scenarios. As I mentioned, we've got the main coupling point between the gas and the electricity generation networks, and that's the gas-fired power plants, which take gas off of the gas network. And so the kind of modeling framework here is to run the production cost model. That model, basically the balancing authority, is determining what it would like to schedule gas generators to do. And from that, you can sort of deduce how much natural gas they need to offtake at each plant. That gas offtake is sent to the gas transmission network system, and it is basically taking into account that demand along with all its other demands, which might include gas for home heating and industrial uses, or deliveries to other customers that are outside of the power system network. So the gas network then tries to basically simulate the delivery of all those gas requirements, and it will basically be, if it's constrained, if it knows that it can't deliver enough gas at the required pressure to a certain part of the network, it will curtail deliveries at that node. And this is set up to curtail at gas generators first, which mimics in reality where you have other users like home heating basically are curtailed last because they're the highest priority. So then lastly, we take basically any constraints from that gas transmission network and we feed it back to the production cost model. So if the gas network says, hey, I can't deliver sufficient gas at this node with this gas generator that you've requested, it will send back a constraint saying, this much is available and the system can operate this way. And then the production cost model has to redispatch the system based on those constraints. So it will typically curtail operations at gas plants where the gas network is constrained, and then increase dispatch at other plants that either have no gas constraints or don't use gas at all. And then another dynamic I want to mention here is, as Carlo alluded to in this real kind of event, there was under forecasting a load, but also a big dramatic change in the wind output, which caused a need for the gas generators to increase very quickly. Now, in reality, the gas transmission operator helped meet that kind of unforeseen increase in demand from the natural gas generators by shifting some of its deliveries. So instead of delivering some gas to outside customers, it provided gas earlier than expected to the electric power system and sort of forestalled some of those other deliveries. So this was a big kind of flexibility move for the gas network operator to participate in. It helped the electric power system by using or allowing them to have some flexibility to meet this unforecasted event, but it's sort of kind of like a hidden flexibility of the gas system that you might not see. So we wanted to understand, what if the gas network hadn't been able to actually do that? If that flexibility had not been available and there wasn't actually sufficient gas that could be moved around to meet that increase in need, what would happen to the system? And so that's exactly what we tested. And here I'll just go through a quick set of results. The plot on the left is basically showing the default behavior during that cold wave event, where you've got 6 days, and in the middle, kind of around day 3 to day 5, you've got that drop in temperatures and the big drop in wind production. And then the left is showing, our base case, and then the right is showing if you don't have the flexibility of that gas network to deliver extra gas to the electric power system. And what we saw here is basically the system responded by redispatching mostly to coal. So you had coal generators that had unused capacity. You either committed some new coal units or you increased generation at coal units that were active. And the result was, over the course of these 6 days, you had an increase in several $100,000 of operation costs on the power system, about a little under 3% of the total operating cost for that system. So that's just one scenario, but as Carlo noted, there was this other case. This was a different weather event where the wind dropped to 0, and so we wanted to push this further and say, well, what if there was no wind? What if that wind lull basically happened for several days instead of just the 12 hours that it occurred in reality? And so we simulate this lower wind. It's just sort of like a hypothetical scenario here, but we extend that low wind period to be several days, and we basically find a similar result. Now you redispatched even more coal and also some other gas that might be in different parts of the network without constraints, and you see a bit higher increase in the total production costs as well. So just to summarize some of the findings so far, we do see that the gas network is able to provide some interesting sorts of flexibility to the power system. And sometimes those are sort of behind the scenes. So it provides a lot of benefit to the electric power system, which is great when it's available. But if it's not available, then the electric power system is relying on it. That could cause problems. And so these kind of stress periods can, I think, expose some of the pitfalls of just relying on that flexibility without coordinating it and making sure that you have it available. And so, the rest of these points here, maybe talking about some ways we can start to plan out and address that. One area of improvement certainly is enhanced forecasting. If you know that these types of events are coming, you can prepare for them, particularly on the gas side. You can prep by moving gas into storage or packing it in as line pack. So if you have anticipation, then maybe there are actions you can take to mitigate them in advance. Another potentially useful intervention here is looking at higher resolution gas nominations. So right now, most gas-fired generators ask for gas from the gas network at a daily level. They ask for basically an average amount for every hour over the course of a day. But in reality, they're often, ramping up and down quite a lot during that day. And so maybe more granular information on when they actually need gas at a higher temporal resolution could help the gas network ensure that it could deliver sufficient gas when the electric power system needs it. One potential option that's talked about often here is firm contracts. So these are contracts where they are not curtailable. So the gas generator might be guaranteed to get the gas. These are typically more expensive, so they may not always be an option for gas-fired generators, particularly given areas where they're in market competition. It could be harder for them to be available for dispatch if they have these more expensive contracts. So it's one mechanism, but maybe not always a solution for all cases. And then lastly, in general, we think more coordination between gas and the electric power system on investments of things like storage, either on the electric or the gas network side, probably can help in terms of mitigating these types of events as they come. So with that, I want to thank Carlo and everyone at NCORD for the invitation to present here, and I'm going to turn it back over to Andy, who's going to help with the question session. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Brian and Carlo. Thank you very much for the presentation. And it looks like we did have some questions that are posed, and we're going to have Brandon Sisson, who's our marketing and branding specialist. He will be moderating the Q&A session during this time. Brandon?
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. We had some great questions in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them all. If we run out of time, we'll reach out to your emails that you provided us, as Andy said earlier. So to start with the first one, it says, your results show that coal and power respond to the lack of gas flexibility. What would happen in a future scenario without coal?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe I can start answering that, and then Brian, maybe you can add your thoughts. In this power system that we looked at in the United States, indeed, there is quite some coal capacity. And as we all know, coal power plants are retiring across the United States. So if we imagine a scenario in the future where there is no coal-fired power plants, who's going to be providing that electric generation flexibility? It's going to be gas if we live in a scenario where we still have gas. And so that will exacerbate this challenge. But there will also be other technologies and other flexibility sources in the system that will help respond to the drop in renewable generation. And that includes batteries or other storage technologies that may be available to respond fast and provide active power generation in short periods of time. But also interregional transmission will help by being able to rely on resources in other networks and also to leverage the resource diversity of renewable resources. If wind is low in this specific region, it may not be low in another region 1,000 miles away that the power system may be able to pull power from. So that will be my answer.
Awesome. Thank you, Carlo. Our next question, what other type of stress events could be captured with this type of modeling framework?
Yeah, really good question. Brian, do you want to start or do you want me to take it first?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to do. I mean, there's some things that could be captured but are hard to capture. Like I think of a lot of the things in Texas where there was freezing at gas wellheads that we don't always have models for that kind of behavior. I mean, maybe we can simulate, cutoff of production with historical data, but sometimes the challenge is like figuring out how to look forward and anticipate what would happen on the system. I think another interesting one to look at is, we only did one direction of coupling here with just the gas offtakes at gas-fired generators. There's an interaction with the compressors, particularly compressors that use electricity to operate. So if the power system goes down and you can't move your gas, and then the lack of ability to move gas affects the power system, you kind of have this cycle that also happened in the Texas outage. So I think there's more of those types of couplings that would be really interesting to look at as well.
Yeah, I will maybe add that even in scenarios where, or in regions where it doesn't get very cold, but the power system still relies a lot on gas-fired power plants, this could be a challenge, especially if you have very large penetrations of wind and solar, and you have a coincident over forecast of wind and solar with an under forecast of demand. That can cause the need to ramp up gas-fired generation with short notice. That can be very challenging for the gas pipeline operator to meet. So as we integrate more renewables in the power system, the gas pipeline operator needs to have some ways of understanding the level of uncertainty in net load and how that translates in the potential need for higher ramps of gas offtakes.
Awesome, thanks, Carlo. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions, so I'll go into another one. The question is, do you recommend utilities to co-optimize gas production and availability with electricity generation and their resource adequacy work?
That's a really good question. Let me think about it for a second. I recommend that utilities should be able, in the resource adequacy work, to capture not just the availability of gas-fired power plants as it's been done historically, which is a function of their historical outage rates, but more also considering the availability of fuel, especially when looking at a correlation of events. So looking at how a weather event may impact not just a single gas-fired power plant availability, but multiple that may be connected to the same pipeline network, but also how that correlates to other variables in the power system. Many utilities are not going to have all the required information to model in full detail the gas pipeline network, but what I would recommend is for them to find ways to work with their gas counterpart or the pipeline that delivers gas to their gas-fired generations to do analysis similar to the ones we've showed today, where they can really quantify that level of risk, and that quantification then can be used as inputs to the resource adequacy analysis. Would you add anything, Brian?
Yeah, I'll just mention, I agree with Carlos said that, like, I think historically the approach has maybe been a bit simplistic, and so now you need to not just count on a gas generator being available, but you need to model the constraints. And yeah, I'll also shout out to a colleague of mine at NREL, Synit Murphy, who's done a lot of work characterizing outage rates, gas failures and outages with weather, things like temperature. So there's a lot, I think, more rich data nowadays on understanding those kind of interactions and correlations, and then using, like, I think the next step is then trying to figure out how to get that into each of the system planners' own models and resource adequacy approaches. So it's becoming a more complicated world, but I think that's gives better representations of the future and hopefully helps to stave off more of these types of events.
Awesome, thank you guys. So I think we're coming up on 9:35 Mountain Time, so I think we're going to call it there. If we missed your question, we will reach out to email. But I appreciate everyone joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining, and have a great day.
Thanks so much, everyone.